You think you know cannabis. You think it's just a plant, a leaf, a high. Maybe you've used it, maybe you haven't. Maybe you see it as medicine. Maybe you write it off as a teenage phase that never really ended. But what if everything you've been told, by friends, by culture, by advertising, wasn't just incomplete? It was deeply misleading. We live in a world where cannabis is everywhere. It's packaged in gummies, sold in upscale boutiques, and marketed as everything from a stress reliever to a tool for unlocking creativity. There's a cannabis-infused version of nearly every product imaginable. Seltzers, lotions, chocolates, toothpicks, and yet, something feels off, like we've missed something ancient, something sacred. What if I told you that cannabis was never meant to be consumed like candy or wine? That for most of its history, it wasn't about pleasure, but about truth? That this plant was once revered, protected, used not to escape life, but to confront it. Across cultures and centuries, cannabis was treated like a mirror, not a toy, a test, not a treat, a doorway, not a distraction. And now, standing in the fluorescent aisles of dispensaries, surrounded by neon signs and Instagram filters, that truth has been buried beneath layers of irony, indifference, and apathy. The most astonishing thing? We did this ourselves. Willingly, casually. We forgot. And worse, we stopped caring. You see, in ancient India, cannabis wasn't a recreational substance. It was a sacrament offered to Shiva, the god of destruction and transformation. In that context, taking cannabis was a spiritual confrontation, a ritual death of the ego. In Taoist alchemy, it wasn't used to chill out. It was combined with other herbs to refine the internal energy, to sharpen perception. In Sufi mysticism, hashish was controversial, not because it dulled the mind, but because it was too powerful. It could trick you into feeling enlightened, while bypassing the actual work of transformation. Even in indigenous and African diaspora traditions, cannabis was understood to carry spiritual weight, an energy that could heal or harm, depending on the intention and the container. Today, we light up in parking lots. We vape while scrolling TikTok. We eat edibles to make the day go by faster. We've turned what was once a sacred tool into a flavor, from temple to transaction, from ritual to retail. And we wonder why anxiety spikes, why paranoia creeps in, why some people spiral instead of rise. It's not the plant, it's the absence of context. We are like children handed a matchbox, never warned that fire can burn as much as it can warm. Some people hear this and shrug. It's just weed, they say. That phrase alone reveals the depth of our disconnect, because the people who once used this plant to dissolve the ego would never dare say, "It's just weed." To them, it was a teacher, a revealer, sometimes even a god. But in our modern relationship with cannabis, something has died. It's not reverence, it's not tradition, it's wonder. We've lost the ability to be amazed, to see cannabis not as an object of consumption but as a force, something that amplifies what's already within us, something that gives back what we bring to it, magnified. That's what this video is about. It's not an argument for or against cannabis. It's an invitation to pause, to look again, to challenge everything you think you know. Because beneath the haze of casual use and cultural laziness lies a hidden truth. Cannabis, when approached with intention, has the power to change you, not by numbing your pain or inflating your ego, but by confronting you with your own reflection. And that truth, it might just surprise you. There's a kind of sadness that doesn't show up as tears. It shows up as numbness, a quiet, tired kind of ache, like walking through the ruins of something that was once beautiful, sacred, alive. That's what I feel when I look at how we use cannabis today. It's not just disappointment, it's grief, because we didn't just misuse a plant, we forgot how to listen to it. Once, cannabis was a teacher. Now, it's just a product. It sits on shelves with barcodes and branding, reduced to flavors and fun, sold like gum, marketed like coffee, and somehow we're okay with that. But it wasn't always like this. Cannabis used to demand something from us. It asked for respect, for readiness, for courage. You couldn't approach it lightly, because the plant didn't just give you a high, it gave you a revelation, and sometimes that revelation was painful. But now, we've stripped the discomfort out, or tried to. We microdose. We market it as anxiety relief. We brand it as a lifestyle accessory. But what about the truth it once revealed? What about the shadow? What about the mirror? We don't want that anymore. We want a softened, commercialized version, a spiritual bypass in edible form, a way to feel better without changing anything. And when cannabis doesn't behave the way we want it to, when it brings anxiety, or fear, or panic, we say the weed was too strong. We say, bad trip. We blame the strain. We don't ask the deeper question, what was it showing me? Because that would mean facing something we've worked very hard to avoid. And here's where the anger starts to rise. Not just at the industry, not just at the influencers and the marketing and the commodification, but at ourselves. We had access to something powerful, ancient, sacred, and we chose comfort over confrontation. We took a tool meant for transformation and turned it into a distraction. We did this. And then we taught the next generation to do the same. We told them, cannabis is chill. It's harmless. It's better than alcohol. We passed it around in college dorms. We giggled. We got the munchies. We forgot. But forgetting has a price. Because when cannabis is used without grounding, without guidance, without ritual, something cracks. I've seen it. I've seen people spiral into paranoia because they weren't ready to meet themselves. I've seen friends use cannabis to enhance creativity, only to become trapped in endless loops of overthinking. I've watched people mistake a fleeting insight for spiritual awakening and lose themselves in ego inflation. I've watched people disappear into the high, week after week, month after month, chasing a feeling instead of facing their life. That's not healing. That's avoidance with a halo. And still, the culture keeps selling it, keeps making it look sexy, convenient. There's nothing convenient about spiritual growth. There's nothing easy about facing your inner world amplified. And yet that's exactly what this plant was designed to do. In ancient cultures, cannabis was reserved for initiates, for those who had trained, fasted, prayed. It was a test, a rite of passage. You didn't light up to escape the world. You lit up to see it, raw, undistorted, including the parts of yourself you didn't want to face. Where did that go? When did we decide we didn't want real clarity, just curated comfort? There's a difference between using cannabis to numb your pain and using it to meet your pain. But meeting it takes work, and we live in a culture that avoids that work at all costs. So here we are, saturated in availability, but starved for meaning. And somewhere, deep down, I think we feel that. I think that's why so many people feel disconnected, even after getting high. I think that's why, after the laughter fades and the snacks are gone, a quiet emptiness remains. Because the plant was speaking, but we weren't listening. Not really. Not with reverence. Not with readiness. And maybe that's the part that hurts the most. Not that we've changed cannabis, but that we've let it change us. Not into more conscious, open-hearted beings, but into passive consumers who forgot what it means to be in a sacred relationship with a force bigger than ourselves. This isn't about guilt or shame. It's about grief. It's about waking up in the aftermath and asking, can we remember what we forgot? There's a different side to the story, not the one sold in dispensaries, not the one that ends in foggy thoughts or half-eaten snack bags, but the story that begins in stillness, in reverence, the story of what cannabis can be when used with intention, clarity, and heart. And when you meet the plant that way, not to escape yourself, but to return to yourself, something extraordinary happens. But not pleasure, not indulgence, but actual joy begins to unfold. It's a quiet kind of joy, the kind that emerges when the world softens, when your senses sharpen, and when the boundary between you and everything else gently dissolves. Colors seem warmer, music hits deeper, the breath feels like a gift. You find yourself smiling, not because you're high, but because you're present in a way you haven't been in years. That's the surprise, the unexpected beauty of returning to this moment fully. Cannabis, when used consciously, doesn't just amplify your thought, it can amplify your awe. I remember one evening years ago, sitting beneath a tree with a few close friends. We had fasted during the day, meditated before gathering, and entered the circle not with casual chatter, but with silence. One small dose, shared intention, for stillness. And what followed was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. The stars didn't just shine, they spoke. The laughter we shared wasn't silly, it was sacred, not performative, but real, the kind that wells up from the soul when something inside you finally exhales. In that space, I felt joy as a living present, not because I was escaping anything, but because I was fully there. The plant was a key, and what it unlocked was a part of myself I had forgotten. That's what so many traditions knew. The sadhus of India didn't use cannabis to numb themselves. They used it to deepen their connection to Shiva, the force of cosmic transformation. Their joy wasn't artificial. It was earned through discipline, fasting, and surrender. In Rastafari circles, cannabis is passed around not for intoxication, but for reasoning. It's a communal portal. You share the smoke, yes, but more importantly, you share the presence, the silence, the rhythm, the divine connection. That joy isn't flashy. It doesn't need filters or captions. It's not the kind of joy you post about. It's the kind that makes you cry for no reason, just because the breeze touched your skin and you realized, for the first time in weeks, that you're alive. Surprising, isn't it? That something so casually dismissed as just weed could be a key to something so deep? And yes, it's not always like that. Sometimes cannabis brings up discomfort. Sometimes it shows you your shadows. But when you've prepared, when you've cultivated presence and surrendered expectation, it can also reveal beauty that is so simple, so profound, it can take your breath away. There's nothing naive about this joy. It's not about pretending the world is perfect or ignoring your pain. It's about seeing everything more clearly, the pain, the beauty, the absurdity, and somehow feeling grateful to be here for all of it. Used with respect, cannabis can help you slow down enough to witness the miracle of existence that's always been there, hiding beneath the noise, the routine, the rush. That's the secret no one tells you, that the real high isn't about rising above life. It's about falling into it, fully, gently, joyfully. And once you've felt that, once you've tasted that kind of presence, it's hard to go back to the numbness of distraction. You want more of this, not the plant, but the presence it helped you access. The laughter that doesn't come from entertainment, but from wonder. The peace that doesn't come from avoidance, but from truth. The joy that feels like a homecoming. That's what's possible. And for many, it's already happening. In small circles, in sacred rituals, in moments of silence beneath open skies. We didn't lose this knowledge. We just stopped looking. But it's still here, waiting, quiet, patient, rooted in the earth, whispering if you're ready to listen. There's a kind of joy that doesn't just warm you, it ignites you. It stirs something ancient, something wild, something alive. That's the feeling many ancient users of cannabis knew. Not sedation, not dullness, but a sacred spark that set their spirit on fire. We rarely talk about cannabis this way. We talk about winding down, zoning out, numbing the stress of a long day. But what about waking up? What about using cannabis to energize the spirit, not sedate it? It's possible. And for centuries, it was the norm. In cultures that treated cannabis as a spiritual ally, it was used to fuel transformation, not just to feel better, but to become different. Picture the rituals. Sadhus walking barefoot for miles to gather before sunrise, bodies lean from fasting, their breath steady, their minds quiet. They didn't get high to avoid life. They used cannabis to step deeper into it, to dissolve the illusion, face the self, and ignite their internal fire. The Rastafari gather with drums, chanting, smoke rising like incense. The herb isn't just consumed, it's invited, welcomed, honored. It doesn't kill their ambition, it channels it. And that's the missing element in modern use, direction. Cannabis, like fire, is neutral. It can light your path or burn down your house. When you sit with a plant in stillness, in ritual, with clear purpose, it amplifies your focus, sharpens your perception, and can even infuse your actions with newfound vitality. But most of us never get there because we don't create the container. And this is where ritual comes in. Not dogma, not rules, rhythm. Ritual is structure with soul. It gives form to your fire. Even something as simple as lighting a candle, sitting in silence, or taking 3 intentional breaths before consumption can transform the entire experience. It signals, this is sacred. I am awake. I am listening. And when you treat the moment as sacred, something inside you begins to respond in kind. Your creativity stirs. Ideas surface that were hidden beneath the noise. You remember things you didn't know you forgot. You feel moved, not just emotionally, but literally moved, like a current is running through you. The poet reaches for the pen. The dancer starts to stretch. The thinker turns inward. The friend becomes more present. And yes, of course, there is joy, but it's not escapist. It's embodied. It's the joy of being connected to self, to space, to purpose. I've seen this in action. A small circle of artists I once joined had a ritual. 1 deep breath, 1 shared intention, and 1 small puff. Then, silence. Then, creation. No phones, no talking, just presence and practice. What followed were some of the most beautiful paintings I've ever seen. Music improvised in the moment, full of soul. Pages filled with raw, honest words. Not because we were high, but because the plant helped us remove the static, and ritual gave us the rhythm to channel what came through. This is how cannabis becomes a tool of sacred activation, but only when it's paired with intention and form. And here's the surprising part. The more sacred the structure, the more free the experience feels. It's not restrictive, it's liberating. It creates the safety to open up emotionally, creatively, spiritually, without falling apart. And that's the real difference between ritual use and recreational use. Recreation is unstructured. It's often paired with distraction, disconnection, or entertainment. Ritual is directed, focused, alive, and cannabis responds accordingly. This plant doesn't want your boredom. It doesn't flourish in apathy. It thrives in reverence. When you meet it halfway, when you show up prepared, something remarkable begins to happen. The insights feel grounded. The sensations become meaningful. The experience becomes usable. Not just a moment of escape, but a movement toward integration. You leave the session not just high, but inspired, re-energized, ready to act, to create, to move through life with more clarity and presence. This is what we can reclaim. We don't need to reject cannabis. We need to remember how to hold it. As a partner, a guide, a spark. Not every session will feel like magic. Not every ritual will yield a breakthrough. But the rhythm builds, the intention accumulates. And over time, what felt casual becomes sacred again. Not because the plant changed, but because you did. There's a particular kind of joy that arrives after hard work, after discipline, after intention, after effort. It's not loud, it doesn't demand attention. It's the quiet joy of alignment, when your actions finally reflect your values, when your experience matches your truth. That's the joy I've felt and seen in others, when cannabis is approached consciously, deliberately, with reverence. There's a kind of pride in that, and it's not egoic. It's not boastful. It's the deep satisfaction that comes from remembering who you are and realizing that this plant, when held with care, can help you come home to that. But it's a complicated joy, because alongside it is something else, something heavier. Not the kind that stops you from functioning, but the kind that quietly follows you like a shadow. The kind you feel when you realize just how much has been lost. Because for every person who has experienced cannabis as a portal to presence, to connection, to healing, there are thousands who've never been given that chance. Thousands who were never taught how to hold it, who were never told it could be sacred, who only know it as an escape. And that's not their fault. We've created a culture where we either criminalize the plant or commercialize it. Either way, we lose. In both models, the soul of the plant is ignored. The depth is stripped away. In one, it's punished. In the other, it's marketed. And nowhere in between do we teach the sacred middle, the space where cannabis is a teacher, not a threat or a toy. And so, even those who might be drawn to the deeper use, the seekers, the artists, the spiritually curious, are often left confused, isolated, even ashamed. They've had moments with the plant that felt profound, beautiful, revealing, and then questioned their sanity because no one else around them seemed to understand. That's a different kind of loneliness. The loneliness of touching something sacred in a world that insists on calling it trivial. I've spoken to people who described cannabis experiences that felt like prayer, like ceremony, like a direct line to something divine. But they shared those moments in whispers, because they were afraid of being dismissed, or laughed at, or called too sensitive, too mystical, too much. That's the cost of forgetting. We didn't just forget how to use cannabis. We forgot how to talk about it. We forgot how to honor those who use it with reverence. We forgot that joy doesn't have to be loud to be meaningful. That pride doesn't need applause. That spiritual experiences don't need to be explained to be real. And yet, despite all of that, something is shifting. Slowly, quietly, a movement is growing, a reclaiming. People are remembering. They're gathering in circles, creating rituals, sharing reflections, turning off their phones and turning toward each other. They're listening. And when that happens, when even one person chooses to sit with cannabis in silence, in presence, in humility, something ancient is restored. It's not just personal pride. It's ancestral remembrance. It's honoring the lineages, from the mountains of India to the hills of Ethiopia to the forests of Brazil, where this plant was seen not as an escape, but as a bridge between the seen and unseen, between the self and the sacred. And every time someone crosses that bridge with intention, they carry that wisdom forward. They become part of the healing. That's where the joy comes in, the kind that doesn't come from the high itself, but from what you do with it, from how you integrate it, from the way you walk after the session is over. More present, more grounded, more aware. That's something to be proud of, not because you used cannabis, but because you used it well, because you remembered what most of the world forgot, because you took something ancient, misunderstood, and commercialized, and made it sacred again in your own life. That doesn't need to be shouted from rooftops. That doesn't need validation. It just needs consistency, intention. Because when we do this, when we bring reverence back to the plant, we're not just healing ourselves. We're healing something much older, something we may never be able to name fully, but can feel quietly like a warmth in the chest, a kind of joy that says, "You're doing it right, keep going." There comes a moment in every seeker's life where they must choose to numb or to awaken, to go through the motions or to burn through illusion. Cannabis, used with presence and reverence, doesn't just sit quietly in your system. It stirs things. It moves energy. It opens doors. But here's the thing no one tells you. Awakening is rarely comfortable. It's thrilling, liberating, absolutely, but also unsettling, messy, sometimes even frightening. Because when you say yes to real change, when you open the door and invite clarity in, you're also inviting everything that's blocking it to rise to the surface. This is the paradox of sacred cannabis use. On the surface, it looks soft, harmless, but when used with real intention, it becomes a lightning rod. And lightning does not discriminate. It illuminates whatever it touches: joy and pain, love and fear, clarity and confusion. That's why preparation matters. That's why grounding matters. That's why discernment is not just a bonus. It's essential, because cannabis, at its core, is an amplifier, not a source of truth, but a magnifier of whatever already exists within you. If you bring confusion, it may deepen. If you bring presence, it will expand. If you bring avoidance, it may turn on you, not out of cruelty, but as a kind of psychic honesty, a mirror that refuses to lie. This is why sacred use is not passive. It is not recreational. It is relational. A conversation between your consciousness and something older, deeper, wilder. It takes courage to engage in that conversation. It takes bravery to sit in silence after you inhale and wait, not for the euphoria, but for what comes through you. Some days it will be awe, some days it will be discomfort. Both are sacred, but most people aren't taught this. They're taught to chase the sensation, not the message. To seek the effect, not the insight. And that's where things get dangerous. Not because cannabis is inherently dangerous, but because when a powerful tool is used without preparation, it becomes a disruptor. In some energy traditions, cannabis is known to increase sensitivity, to make the subtle body porous. That can be beautiful if you are grounded, but if you're not, if you've skipped the breath work, the intention, the stillness, you may not just feel more, you may take on energies that don't belong to you. That's the vulnerability of this path. It asks more of you. It asks you to slow down, to prepare, to humble yourself before something you cannot fully control. But that's where the excitement lives, too. Because when you do this, when you take the time to cleanse, to clarify, to set the container, the results can be life-changing. Clarity arrives. Patterns are revealed. Decisions become obvious that once felt impossible. You might feel called to leave a relationship that's draining your soul, or to finally speak the truth you've been silencing, or to start a creative project that's been buried under years of self-doubt. And it won't just be a thought. It'll feel like a push from the inside out. That's the power of cannabis when it's met with readiness. It doesn't just soothe, it activates. It doesn't just relax, it realigns. And if you're paying attention, it will start whispering things like, "You're more than this. There's something you've been avoiding. You're ready now." That's not the voice of paranoia. That's the voice of awakening. And it can sound scary if you've spent years trying to avoid it. But here's the beauty. You don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to change your whole life overnight. You just have to listen. One breath, one question, one session at a time. Cannabis can't walk the path for you, but it can show you where the next step is. It can remind you of the truth you already carry, the version of you that's been waiting beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the constant craving for escape. And yes, there will be moments of discomfort, but discomfort isn't the enemy. Disconnection is. And if you're using cannabis to reconnect, not to numb, but to feel, to face, to transform, then every moment becomes meaningful. Every insight becomes usable, and your fear? It doesn't go away. It just stops running the show, because something deeper has taken its place. Readiness. At some point on every spiritual path, the tool must fall away. The incense burns out. The teacher goes silent. The ritual ends. And then, it's just you. This is the part no one tells you about. That the real test of any sacred practice, cannabis included, is not how high you go or how deep the insight runs. It's how well you walk afterward. What do you do with what you've seen? How do you carry what you've learned when the feeling fades? And eventually, the hardest question of all, can you continue without it? This is not a rejection of cannabis. It's not shame. It's not some false idea of purity. It's reverence of a different kind. Because if cannabis has truly helped you, really helped you, it has pointed you back to yourself, to your breath, to your body, to your clarity, to your stillness. And if you've been listening, you'll reach a point where you realize you don't need the key anymore, because the door is now open. And stepping through that door can feel like a death, not of the self, but of the dependency, the comfortable rhythm, the familiar ritual. You'll hesitate. You'll wonder, will the insight still come? Will I still feel connected? Will I lose my clarity? Will I lose myself? That's the fear talking, and it's understandable. We live in a world that makes it hard to feel deeply, to think clearly, to stay open. Cannabis made that easier for a time. It softened the noise. It amplified the signal. But now, the signal lives inside you. And the joy? It's still there, but it's quieter now, wiser, more grounded. It's the joy of spiritual adulthood, of knowing you can access peace, presence, and clarity on your own. It's the joy of trusting your inner compass, even without external tools. That doesn't mean you never return to cannabis. It means you no longer depend on it. And that distinction changes everything. I've known people who built entire identities around their cannabis use. Their creativity, their insights, their social circles, all orbiting the plant. And then came the day when the plant stopped teaching, or started bringing discomfort, or simply went silent. They panicked, because without it, they didn't know how to feel sacred anymore. That's not failure. It's a threshold, and crossing it is part of the path, because the plant was never meant to be your home. It was meant to be your guide. You don't live in the temple. You visit it. You pray. You receive. And then you return to the world. And if you truly received something sacred, it will show, not in how high you can get, but in how clearly you can live, how deeply you can listen, how gently you can move through your day, not because you're high, but because you're aware. That is the quiet pride of integration. It's not flashy. It won't go viral. It won't earn applause, but it will change your life, because now the wisdom is yours. And if someday you return to the plant, it won't be out of habit. It will be because you have a question, a clear intention, a sacred reason. And even then, you may find you don't need it, because the answer, the connection, the clarity, it's already within you. That's the final gift of conscious cannabis use. When you're able to look at the plant with gratitude and peace and say, thank you. So now what? You've seen the mirror. You've felt the fire. You've glimpsed what cannabis can reveal when it's treated with care, intention, and reverence. The question is no longer, what can the plant do? The question is, what will you do now that you know? This isn't about lifestyle. This isn't about judgment. This is about alignment. Because once you've seen the sacred, you can't keep pretending it's just recreational. Once you've experienced the mirror, you can't go back to using it for distraction. And if you felt even one moment of truth, one breath of clarity, one tear of recognition, one silence that shook you, then you already know, this is not just a plant. It's a portal, a teacher. And like every great teacher, it eventually steps back and waits for you to lead. But here's the tension. We are not living in a world that supports sacredness. We live in a culture of convenience, not reverence. A culture that teaches you to chase pleasure, numb pain, optimize productivity, but rarely, if ever, to feel, to pause, to face yourself. So even if you want to change, even if you feel the call rising in your chest, the world will try to pull you back. It will say, light up and scroll, smoke and forget, consume and repeat. But you You're not here for that. You're here because something inside you is stirring, because the old way doesn't satisfy anymore, because you've tasted something deeper, and now, shallow doesn't work. And that's terrifying, but it's also exhilarating, because this is the edge. This is the threshold where you either step back into comfort or forward into change. And it is a choice to light up with intention or to abstain with clarity, to create a sacred container or to continue consuming in chaos, to reflect or to repeat, to wake up or to fall back asleep. And the beauty is, this choice is always yours. Every session is an invitation. Every moment is a doorway. But here's what I'll say. If you want to reclaim cannabis as a sacred ally, it won't happen passively. It requires effort, structure, community, and courage. You'll need to prepare your body. You'll need to clear your mind. You'll need to let go of shortcuts. You'll need to feel things fully. You may lose some friends who don't understand. You may question everything you once believed. You may cry for the self you've abandoned and celebrate the one you're becoming. Because that's what happens when you stop using the plant to hide and start using it to heal. You wake up, you grow up, you level up, and slowly, everything changes. Not just the way you use cannabis, but the way you live, the way you love, the way you create, the way you show up. That's what's at stake, and that's what's possible. So let this be your call. Not from me, not from the plant, from your own soul. The part of you that already knows. The part of you that's been whispering, there's more than this. The part of you that's ready. Now is the time to move differently, to listen more carefully, to treat this practice and this life as sacred. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to get it all right. You just need to begin, because the path is waiting. The circle is forming. The spark is still alive. And cannabis? It's still here too. Not to save you, not to fix you, but to walk beside you, if you're willing to meet it with your whole heart. So choose, not later,